With regard to the DSM-4, is it true that it does not have a diagnosis of quote-unquote battered woman, right?
True.
And now, what we really have in this particular field is what you do, correct? You have somebody who has experience, right?
Well, I want to hear what you're talking about. Can you tell
or do
me?
you not have experience in dealing with what you allege to be battered women?
I do.
And with regard to that experience and making a determination whether or not an individual is a battered woman, basically what you have available to you are clinical interviews, right?
That's one thing that we have available.
Right, and basically a clinical interview is you sitting across from the person that may or may not be a victim of battering and talking to them, right?
That's one of the things I use.
Right, that's what you do, right?
That's one of the things I do.
That's one of your main instruments, if you will, in trying to determine whether or not the situation
It is not my main instrument, Mr. Martinez.
Is it one of the items that you use?
It is one of the things that I use, correct.
And in this particular case, you told us that what? You spent, 40 hours talking to the defendant?
44.
44 hours, so that's the clinical interview aspect of it, correct?
I used that as that is the clinical interview that I did, right?
Yes or no? That is the clinical aspect of your practice, correct?
It is a clinical aspect of my practice. Correct.
And in this case, the 44 hours, that's the clinical aspect of this evaluation, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by the clinical aspect.
Well, a clinical interview, as you know what a clinical interview is, right?
Of course I know what a clinical interview is.
All right, then we seem to be having problems with it. With regard to a clinical interview, ma'am, isn't that a situation where you sit across from an individual and you talk to them about the issue that is at hand? Isn't that true?
You interview them, you ask questions, you do an assessment.
So when you are interviewing, you're not talking then, right?
Mr. Martinez,
yes or no? My question is, are you talking, yes or no?
Mr. Martinez, are you angry at me?
Ma'am, is that relevant to you? Is that important to you?
Ladies and gentlemen, please refrain from laughing in the courtroom.
Is that important to you whether or not the prosecutor is angry with regard to your evaluation? Does that make any difference to your evaluation whether or not the prosecutor is angry? Yes or no?
Objection, Judge. Comment, question.
Overruled. It makes a difference to me the way I'm spoken to, and I would like you to speak to me the way I speak to you.
Ma'am, is it true that just because the prosecutor is angry at you, is that going to make you change your answer with regard to whether or not this is a battering situation?
No, certainly not.
The fact that the prosecutor may or may not, or you may perceive him as being angry, that really has nothing to do with your evaluation, does it?
No, but it certainly is.
Yes or no? Does it have anything to do with your evaluation? And Judge, it's a yes or no answer.
Judge, she's trying to answer the question. Some of these questions cannot be answered by yes or no.
Ms. Lawley, can you answer that question, yes or no?
I'm not sure at this point what the question is, because when someone is approaching in that way, it's very hard to listen.
All right. Restate your question.
Just because somebody has a demeanor that you perceive to be angry, is that going to sway your opinion as to what you think in this case?
No, it isn't.
Is it going to change anything about your evaluation based on the way the questions are asked?
No.
So in this case, when we're talking about the interview, the clinical interview, what we're talking about you doing is speaking to the defendant across the table about the issues in this case, right?
Yes.
And that's the interview, speaking with each other. You spent 44 hours, right?
Yes.
The other thing that you indicated to us was that, well, you looked at a lot of other collateral items, right?
Yes.
You looked at journals, is what you indicated, right?
One of the things I looked at.
Sure, and you indicated that you looked at writings of interviews with other people, right?
That I looked
Interviews that were done by somebody else.
Yes, yes.
You looked at text messages, right?
Yes.
Instant messages, right?
Yes.
Emails, right?
Yes.
And that's how your evaluation was in this particular case, right?
That is correct.
You did not, other than talking to the defendant, you did not talk to anybody yourself, right?
That is correct.
So you were left, if you will, in terms of the materials that you were to review, not from the defendant, not about the journals, you were sort of left to just read what somebody else had written about an interview with a collateral source, right?
On those particular collateral sources. On the
Yes.
interview parts, certainly, not on the IMs and the
I'm
text.
talking about the collateral sources that actually somebody wrote down a synopsis, right? And one of the things that we know with regard to your particular approach is that since there is no diagnosis in the DSM-4, there really is no, if you will, guide out there to tell you when somebody is really a battered individual or if somebody is an abused individual, right?
That's not correct.
Well, what we actually have then is, let's take exhibit number 558. Isn't this what you used to tell us?
That was an example.
I'm not done my...
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Isn't
apologize.
this true, exhibit 558? Isn't that what you ended your testimony with, talking about this particular continuum of aggression and abuse to tell us that the defendant, in your opinion, was the victim of abuse, right?
That was not the only thing that I used, Mr.
Yes or
Martinez.
no? Did you use this to tell us that the defendant was in an abusive relationship? Yes or no?
Judge, she tried to answer the question. He interrupted her.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no. Do you want the truth, Mr. Martinez, or do you want
Ma'am,
yes or
I'm
no?
asking you questions. You seem to be having trouble answering my questions.
I have trouble.
If you have a
Okay.
problem understanding the question, ask me that. If you want to, do you want to spar with me? Will that affect the way you view your testimony?
Argumentative.
Sustained.
We approach, Your Honor.
Yes.